Joining us now, former Governor Asa Hutchinson. Governor, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely.
I want to start a little bit with your political experience. You've been in public service a long time, U.S. Attorney, served in Congress, obviously Governor, DEA, DHS, you name it. All that experience, did anything truly prepare you for what happened March 2020?
Actually, I was probably as prepared as any governor at that moment because I had, at Homeland Security, we trained on emergency response. And so I knew the lay of the land and I knew what actions to take. But no one has had a pandemic like we had in over 100 years. And so it was new, it was novel, it was the unexpected, and it was in a field of medicine that obviously I'm not trained in. And so it was difficult, but the background that I had certainly helped me as I navigated through that.
That's where you got to rely on your staff and the experts, right? None of us were trained in medicine, but felt like we were learning a lot as we went along.
That's true. I wore out two health directors during the pandemic, and they were really terrific partners, and ultimately they were called to a higher position. But I relied upon them. I was fortunate that Dr. Nate Smith was an infectious disease specialist, and so he had a lot of training in this particular area and was very instrumental. And he was also good because even though he knew exactly what had to be done in terms of a medical response, he also was very practical and understood the limitations of the response and how you needed to adjust those for the economy, for people being able to get out of their home, for livelihood. And so that was helpful, and I did rely upon my Secretary of Health during that time.
Now, you're a big basketball fan. We all know that. And I think kind of a vivid memory for a lot of sports fans was when the SEC canceled that basketball tournament in March 2020. It's kind of a first glimpse of how disruptive of a force we were dealing with here. Obviously, we know it went on and there are way worse disruptions than that, but that was kind of eye-opening for a lot of people in the public. What was it like for you behind the scenes? There were already some cases in the U.S. Had you guys already been discussing response and the pandemic possibilities?
Well, first of all, on the sports side of it, it was a snowball effect. And I have visited with Governor Kevin Stitt in Oklahoma, who had to make the call to close that first NBA game, Oklahoma City Thunder, and no one wanted to make the call. And ultimately looked to him, and he had to make the call to cancel the game. And once that happened, then you had SEC and other tournaments cancel itself, and then we had the state basketball tournament going on. And no one wanted to make that call, and they continued to call me, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? And finally I said, finish the game, and then you're gonna have to call the tournament off. And so those are difficult decisions. And sports played a big role in us going back to school. It was the letters that I had from girl volleyball players and football players that said, please let us play this next year. It's our senior year. It's so important to us and our opportunity for a scholarship in the future. And that had an impact on my decision making as to how important it was for us to get back to school after that first spring semester that we all went virtual.
Yeah, obviously we know about the schools, certain businesses that had to close down for a time being, the indoor dining, the barber shops. Obviously all the debate about mask mandates. Was there anything in particular that you wish you had maybe done differently?
Probably, and to that point, it's really important that we have a comprehensive 9/11 type review of the decision making during the pandemic. And I'm actually going to be interviewed next week that there is going to be a national study. And that's important for us to know, did this make sense? Was this a good decision? What we could have done better. In terms of my decision making, there'd probably be some things that we could do differently, but everything I did was designed to get things open in Arkansas. And one of the things that I resisted was the national pressure to shelter in place in Arkansas. We were one of 5 states that didn't shelter in place. I didn't say this business is essential and another business is non-essential and you've got to close. We didn't make that distinction. And so it allowed us to keep our economy moving to a greater extent.
You mentioned national pressure. Did you experience political pressure too? I remember at one point even the state legislature working to maybe curtail your emergency powers or at least create some checks and balances there. How did the political landscape impact your ability to lead during the pandemic?
Well, I had significant leeway. My emergency powers that the legislature gave me allowed me to make the decisions necessary to protect our health, but also to keep our economy open. Also, it was very important to maintain communication with the legislature and work with them. And I'll never forget when the legislature did meet, they met in a gymnasium in order to avoid the transmission of COVID. And they were worried about their own health. In fact, we had a number of legislators that contracted COVID, and so there was a reluctance to meet, but there was an importance of communication during that time. So they're a very important partner. There was some tension, and there's some things I could have done better, but we worked together in the end and recognized that it was an emergency and we need to govern in that way.
Now, the daily COVID-19 updates with all of us in the media, are you sick of all those graphs and slideshows yet?
Well, that was something. Even this week, I've had people come up to me and say, thank you for the way you led us through COVID. Thank you for communicating with us every day. It gave people confidence and a part of the decisions, a part of what went behind the decisions that were made. And I didn't intend for my daily COVID update to become a daily COVID update, but it was necessary, and I recognized how important it was, and we had over 200 daily COVID updates during that time. So one of the things I learned was how important and critical communication was during that time, during any emergency, and how you take them on the journey with you. I made it clear that we might make this decision today, but because we have more information, that decision has to change down the road. And I think they understood that. And while they might not agree with everything I did, they understood that I was trying to make the best decision for the health of Arkansas, but also for making sure everybody had a livelihood.
In terms of communication, obviously there's what you were telling us, the actual words of it, but just how you presented yourself. I mean, it's a time of high anxiety, a lot of fears going around. How much thought and preparation did you put into the simple fact that the way you presented the information could really maybe quell someone's fears or make them worse?
A lot of thought went into it, and that's one of the reasons. It wasn't just me communicating, but I had our Secretary of Health. I brought in hospital administrators. I brought in community leaders to communicate as well. And I think all of that sense gave the public understanding that we're operating as a team and that we're thinking through this. But the tone was important. And there was a lot of days I went in there and just had terrible news. Cases are up, deaths are up, infections are up, testing is down. Those are not good statistics that I was having to share, and it was hard. It was hard, but they saw the heartache I had and the honesty in which we presented it.
I want to kind of end where we began, your long career in public service, and throughout the decades you've been known as a conservative Republican. And I wonder, do you think the pandemic has changed the perception of where you fall on the Republican spectrum, or has it changed the Republican Party in general?
Well, everybody looks back at that and they interpret it in different ways, and perhaps the perception changed of me. I think most of it is positive as to how I led through the pandemic. But for example, people think I closed restaurants down. Well, or I closed Main Street businesses down. Well, the fact was that no one was out of their house shopping, and businesses made a decision on their own in many instances to close down during the pandemic. They didn't want to go in there and expose themselves, or they didn't have any customers. And so sometimes people say, well, he closed them down, and in fact, we kept them open. Now, obviously there's some decisions that I wish we hadn't have made, in hindsight. But you even look at the pressure from Donald Trump. I'll never forget the call that Donald Trump had with all the governors saying we've got to close all of our businesses down. We've got to shelter in place through the end of April. And I resisted that and said, no, we're not going to do that. And so there was a lot of political dynamics that was tough during that time. People will interpret it in different ways, and I did the best that I could during that time.
Okay. Governor Asa Hutchinson joining us talking COVID 4 years later. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.